it was clear to court watchers like us that this was how this case was going to come out. Anybody who watched the argument before the First Department saw that this panel of judges was not sympathetic to Tish James. We've got a montage of questions. This is not Tish James arguing here. It's her deputy, Judith Avail. And as soon as she got up to the lectern, she had a hot bench, lots of questions, and none of them was particularly favorable toward her and Tish James's position. You're going to see this montage. I want the audience to know only the first judge who you will hear was appointed by a Republican. All the other judges on this court were appointed by Democrats. So this is a Democrat court that just found in favor of Donald Trump. But here's how the oral argument went a couple months ago, September of 24.
Judith Vail for the New York Attorney General's office. All of the defendants repeatedly violated...
Ms. Vail, can you identify any previous case in which the Attorney General sued under Executive Law 6312 to upset a private business transaction that was between equally sophisticated partners, where the supposed victim had the ability and legal obligation to discover the allegedly misrepresented matters by conducting its own due diligence, where the supposed wrongdoer advised the supposed victim through written disclaimers to conduct its own due diligence and to draw its own conclusions, where the alleged misrepresentation almost entirely concerned inherently subjective valuations of properties and businesses.
Yes.
And where the victim never complained about any fraud in the transactional losses from it.
And I want to add to his question, and little to no impact on the public marketplace.
Well, maybe I'll take that first, Your Honor, and work backwards. There was absolutely a public impact and a public interest here. There are at least 4 different public harms from the kind of misconduct here.
The immense penalty in this case is troubling. So how do you tether the amount that was assessed by the Supreme Court to the harm that was caused here, where the parties left these transactions happy about how things went down?
Well, disgorgement, Your Honor, looks at taking the gain away from the wrongdoer. And although this is a large number, it's a large number for a couple reasons. One, because there was a lot of fraud.
Oh, it's because there was a lot of fraud. Here, by the way, Phil, is when it happened, the View's response, thinking about the possibility of Tish James seizing Donald Trump's properties throughout New York, which is what Tish James has been promising to this day that she's going to do. Watch. This is Stop 53.
Says he cannot come up with the cash to cover his $400 million plus bond in his New York fraud case.
And I can't wait to see the chains on Trump Tower, actually, on Fifth Avenue. I'm kind of excited about it.
Sonny Hostin should have been more worried about her husband's legal troubles and less focused on Donald Trump's. As it turns out, all these people wind up revealing themselves. Time reveals them, or in her case, their family members, for what they truly are, Phil.
Well, look, that's what we can expect out of The View, because, you know, The View is The View, and we all know what that is. But what's more troubling to me is watching this assistant prosecutor from the AG's office make this ridiculous argument to the appeals court, talking about fraud and disgorgement of ill-gotten gains, when there was no actual fraud. Nobody was defrauded of a damn thing. There was not one nickel that was defrauded from any of these lenders. And so the whole thing is just built on a house of cards. Engeron, I think, has some responsibility here, too, because if you're the judge and the trial judge, you're supposed to make sure that this kind of farce doesn't happen in your courtroom. But he allowed it, and he was a part of it. And so what I want to know is why we are allowing these judges like this and prosecutors like this to stay involved in these cases. When Tish James goes out and makes all of these public comments about how she is focusing her efforts specifically on one individual that she is targeting for political reasons, how is that prosecutor allowed by the judge to remain on the case? Because if that's not bias, expressed bias, I don't know what is.
Phil, how many times did we have conversations on this show about Fani Willis and the number of motions that she was subjected to because she made out-of-court statements that were against Trump and the defense team suggesting they were racist. They played the race card against her. And that was because she committed ethical violations that they called her out on. And then she, in defense of herself, went into a church and tried to suggest they were all racist. That became a new basis to potentially disqualify her, because you're not allowed to even say something like that. Never mind campaign on the promise to get just some citizen whose alleged crimes you don't even know exist yet. I mean, that's why you say she should be disbarred. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, in a rational world, in a rational legal world, a trial judge would not allow either of these prosecutors to stay in the case. A simple motion saying, look, judge, this is what she has said publicly about my client. She's targeting my client. And in a criminal context, if you're talking about, targeted malicious prosecution, that's one thing. It's the same principle over in the civil case. You can't just use the awesome power of the state to target and prosecute specific persons with whom you have a political beef, and it's just so crazy that we're here in August of 2025 having this discussion, because this is like law 101. It's almost like people forgot law that they learned in law school, or they were absent the day they taught law in law school. Engoron needs to be off the bench. He has no business presiding over trials in New York. Letitia James has no business bringing, of all things, mortgage fraud cases now on behalf of the state of New York. These people need to be out of their jobs. They need to be dealt with. They need to be dealt with severely. And honestly, I'm at the point where I don't know that the appeals process is enough. It's not enough to just say, all right, Engoron, you and your $500 million judgment, you're done, no more of that. That's not enough. We need to have an appellate process that can send a message to prosecutors and to judges and say, look, you can't do this. There's rules against it, and these things have teeth. Yeah,
the
you can't
whole
abuse
process
people like
was
this.
Abusive. It was intended to be abusive of Donald Trump, who has just reacted in a very, very long Truth Social post. I'm going to read you just my producer's pulling of the highlights. Total victory in the fake New York State Attorney General Letitia James case. I greatly respect the fact that the court had the courage to throw out this unlawful and disgraceful decision that was hurting business all throughout New York State. By the way, that was something verified by Kevin O'Leary, who was saying the chilling effect this is going to have on companies from wanting to do business in New York. Sorry, that was my own aside. Others, continuing here with Trump, were afraid to do business there. The amount, including interest and penalties, was over $550 million. It was a political witch hunt in a business sense, the likes of which no one has ever seen before. That's really true. Trump's prone to hyperbole, but that's actually true. Going back to him, every single dollar was thrown out, even the penalties imposed on us by the corrupt judge, one of the most overturned in history, Arthur Engoron. I am so honored by Justice David Friedman's great words of wisdom, which should be read by everyone. I would also like to thank the court for having the courage to make this decision, which is already going down as one of the worst business persecutions in the history of our country. I mean, that's just great. And honestly, good for him. And here's a little from David Friedman's opinion that Trump cites. He writes, the Attorney General in her 2018 election campaign for her current office repeatedly promised the voters that her top priority upon being sworn in would be to bring down President Trump and his real estate empire. Whatever one may think of President Trump's character and policies, Section 6312 was not enacted for the Attorney General to use as a stick with which to beat the opponents of her political party. I mean, Will, from a judge on a New York State appellate court, that's like as vicious and sweeping a condemnation as you can get.
Yeah, and I think it's really revealing of, this is sort of why President Trump is president now. I think if you go back to 2023, this case, along with so many of the other obviously unjust prosecutions of him, I think it really cemented Republican support for President Trump in the primary. And I think it's ultimately, he was ultimately vindicated at the ballot box in the first instance before any of this stuff came forward. Listening to how you guys are talking about this, it just made me think that the actual just result here isn't merely that this gets thrown out. It's that the state of New York has to compensate President Trump for his legal fees and his trouble. It's really ridiculous that they persecuted him in this way. And, maybe he'll pursue an appeal on that front to say that the state of New York needs to cover his costs.
That would be amazing.
I think Tish James personally ought to have to reimburse him. It ought to come out of her hide. It ought to come out of her bank account. Whatever she's got left, it ought to bankrupt her the way it could bankrupt.
She's got multiple homes.
If it wasn't Donald Trump, nobody else would have been able to afford to defend themselves in this litigation. So she ought to be on the hook personally, financially, for this type of specious and egregious, malicious prosecution.
Okay, but now what about the remaining injunctive relief, which has not been stricken? And that's one of the reasons why David Friedman, who Trump just praised, he said, I would reverse the judgment entirely and dismiss the complaint. I haven't read the whole opinion. It's 323 pages, but I think this is a unanimous reversal of the monetary award. It's not a unanimous decision on all reasons and how they got there, but it's a unanimous reversal on that monetary award. And Justice Friedman said, I'd reverse the whole thing. I would dismiss this complaint because the other judges left in place, the injunctive relief that Engoron had put in place. I said in the intro, look, compared to $550 million, this is a nothing burger. But still, it's kind of bullshit since the whole case is bullshit and it's still standing. So what do we think the effect of the sparring between President Donald Trump and the Fed is going to be? Can the Fed take the right action at the right time? Do we trust in that? Or are we going to be looking at a potential economic slowdown as they slow roll any of their moves as they worry about his tariffs? And what exactly does all of this mean for your savings? You might want to consider diversifying right about now with gold through Birch Gold Group. For decades, gold has been viewed as a safe haven in times of economic stagnation, global uncertainty, and high inflation. And Birch Gold makes it incredibly easy for you to diversify some of your savings into gold. If you have an IRA or old 401k, you can convert that into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, or just buy some gold to keep it in your safe. First, get educated. Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. Just text MK to the number 989898. Again, text MK to 989898, and you'll start the process of just getting the 411 on what it means to own gold. Consider diversifying a portion of your savings into gold. So if the Fed cannot stay ahead of the curve for the country, at least you can stay ahead of the curve for yourself. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.